And my dream has been to ride the river on one of those tugs.
I think I told Tony that when he was in the studio.
Wow.
Gaber, Gary,
DC, you got more books.
DC, the counselor.
We're live on
Jim,
YouTube.
Chris. All right.
And DC, you just got back from the Pantanal, right? Or are you going to the Pantanal? You're going. Okay.
Exciting stuff.
Caber, I really want to know where your secure bunker is.
Yeah, you look like you're potentially below ground right now. Happy New Year, everybody.
And Al, you live in Florida, correct?
Good to see everybody.
That's not a bad blue screen job there, or green screen, I guess. I love that shot.
Looks cold in Florida right now.
Yeah, well, you know.
All right. Well, hey everybody. So welcome to 2024. Exciting stuff. We're kind of getting back into the grind of the everyday and out of the holidays and all the eating and family and whatnot.
Are we live on YouTube?
I didn't Jared said we were.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we're up and rolling. So today we're going to kind of mix it up. We're going to talk about people's creative photographic resolutions for 2024, just some things that everybody wants to work on. And we got a few submissions on that. And I think Rick and I and David and Darren might have a few things to say about resolutions for the new year photographically. And we'll just kick it off with, how's the new year been treating you, Rick?
New Year's been treating me well. I actually have a couple of announcements before we get going there. I know there are a lot of people who are waiting for the Scotland workshop to get posted. And the good news is that there will be a Scotland workshop in 2025 as well. As I mentioned last fall, when we talked about workshops, we anticipated that the first Scotland workshop would sell out, and it did. It's actually before I've even posted it. It filled with alumni. And I'm sure there will be some people who drop out in the next few months. And I know that this will cause a lot of people consternation and maybe even pitchforks in the Zoom chat. But we had to keep the Scotland workshop, the first Scotland workshop we did, small, and we wanted to make it available to alumni who had specifically requested it for quite a while. We've been talking about this for 2 years, so I apologize to the people who were on the waiting list. I'm going to send an email out probably sometime in the next week to those people talking about what we're going to do for next year. But the other sort of more pressing news is we have one spot that opened up in the Mazatlan workshop. And I imagine that will go soon. We're looking forward to that. The total eclipse down there should be pretty amazing. I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, Hudson, but
it's a fun town in general. Beautiful white sand beaches. We'd stay in the old part of Mazatlan, not the kind of new Las Vegas-y 20-kilometer strip that runs up that crescent of coast there. Kind of out of the crazy masses, more in the old part of Mazatlan traditional style. And it's the total eclipse will be, right in that old part of the city. I went there last year, scouted it. The food is fantastic. The hotel that we have picked has a rooftop pool and bar. It's right in the heart of everything. We don't even need to drive anywhere, which makes it nice for a total eclipse. And the other great thing about Mazatlan is that it is the second largest world destination for Carnival. So they're used to dealing with masses and masses of people. They have these little golf cart-like cabs with VW engines because the bugs were made there for decade after decade after decade. And they just run constantly up and down, carrying people around like little mini taxis. It's a pretty adorable spot, and it's going to be a wonderful place to be, low stress for the eclipse. So if you want to know more about it and you want to know logistics about getting there and how to make it all happen, Rick is the guy to talk to about it.
Yep. Yep. Rick at hudsonhenry.com.
Yep.
So the last sort of bit of housekeeping is next office hours will be February 20th. And we'll talk a little bit about, we'll have done our two printing workshops for 2024, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from the workshops. Those are always fun. And then I think we're gonna talk about, we might touch on it a little bit today, but there's been a whole bunch of stuff about AI editing. You think we've sort of had a magnitude change in the sort of the AI stuff inside Photoshop. I know Luminar's been doing some stuff, or Skylum's been doing some stuff with their apps. And it just feels like this is a good time to maybe talk about that. We've been talking about it in the workshops. Maybe talk a little bit about how we use it, generative fill and things like that. But it just seems like it's a good thing to time. So, for questions or comments, I mean, we're gonna limit this very much to the use of AI as a retouching tool, not as a creating imagery from nothing, from a prompt type of stuff. But it'd be interesting to sort of hear your thoughts about it. As I've said to people, I mean, Ansel Adams used retouching constantly in all of his photos. He used local editing is actually what he did in the darkroom. So I mean, retouching has been around forever, and there's questions that people have about, at what point does it ethically become something different and all that. So we just thought there's been a lot of commentary in some of our WhatsApp groups about it. We thought it'd be a good time to maybe sort of talk about it and hear your thoughts. So that will be February 20th.
I think it'll be a really fun topic of discussion.
Yeah.
And this thing continually comes up. I mean, I remember it in the days of film to digital. It was like I talked to an artist who was selling his prints at a big, state fair type thing, and he was so upset that anybody would ever apply sharpening to an image. Well, that's cheating.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I was like, but wait, didn't Ansel Adams use tape on negatives? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, I don't think if we're not, like I said, we're not trying to solve the issue of whether AI is legit or, the problems with AI. It's just more, how do we apply it as photographers and editors trying to create great work? So
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, so those are the big things. So Hudson, you were in Australia for a while.
I was, and it was not necessarily a scouting trip for workshops. It wasn't at all, actually. It was just a family trip. It was a family trip. I have relatives there. They've visited multiple times. They've got an adorable little nearly 2-year-old cousin of mine. And taking the kids down there to just spend time and be in the warmth was the whole thing. So I didn't take a whole lot of photo gear. I actually carried my little Nikon Z50 instead of even bringing the 100 to 400. I brought it with the 50 to 250 because it's lighter than just that lens, and it let my boy Pike run around with the camera a little bit. I'll just show you,
Yeah.
Woody, can you enable screen sharing for me? Post to disabled. Okay, all right. Oh, there we go. All right. I think I'm in. Oops, I went 1, 2. There we go. All right. So here we are. Just a few images, and I'm going to leave my data up here. You can see what camera I used and what the settings were. I brought the Leica, I brought the ZF with my 50 millimeter and a 24 to 120, and I had the Z50 really for Pike. And I just love, this is the reason why I love the Leica, the ability to have that just amazing 1.7 lens. This is my little cousin, more like a niece, Stella, at Bells Beach, which is a really famous surf beach 10 minutes away from where my cousin lives in Torquay, which is right near Melbourne. And just, having that for family stuff, or, a landscape shot, if you're out somewhere where it avails itself. That 28 millimeter is so darn versatile, especially with 60 megapixels of quality sensor behind it. It's just an amazing, amazing lens. And just having those ability to capture family moments. I'm going to throw in a couple of pictures just as a proud papa that, my boy Pike at 7 running around with the Z50 with a 75 to 350 millimeter lens, or 375 millimeter lens equivalent, was doing pretty good work. I mean, framing and focusing, in program mode. I was pretty blown away. He did a great job. This one I threw in. I had one moment where we were driving up the Great Ocean Road, and we went up to Apollo Bay, and we went beyond that to the 12 Apostles, just to sort of see the sights moving north along that coast. And along the way, we just had this sunbreak on this overcast day late in the day, and I was like, pull the car over, and I hopped out with the Q3. And I just want to showcase, this is an image I captured underexposed, to not completely blow the highlights out here. And pulling up the shadows to get a usable image, I just want to show you like how much noise, even, this is a 60 megapixel sensor. We're at 100 ISO, base ISO, but still just pulling the shadows up. They were black in this underexposed image. Then I shot it as 3-frame HDR, 3 stops apart. This basically the same moment, bap, 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 and blended those in Lightroom, merged to HDR. And, it's got to load this thing in, but I think you can see as it loads in, come on. I thought I rendered a 1-to-1 preview
60,
before doing
yeah.
this for you.
60
megapixels there. Yeah, but look at the difference in the shadows here. Look at the difference in the quality of the image. And there's no way on earth the graduated filter would give you this nuance. I'm only holding back the highlights in this little circle in the center and letting the shadows expose naturally. I just think that HDR capture with our modern cameras with this broad dynamic range is just a gift, and capturing things 3 stops apart, 3 frames is just a wonderful way. I haven't edited these at all, but I thought this is just so crazy to run through a landscape where instead of deer looking at you, you've got these faces sticking out of the bushes. Again, having the Q3, the wind was blowing Stacy's hair. This is at this beautiful place called the 12 Apostles. And I kind of throw this in here to say, everybody deals with these situations on a family trip where your purpose isn't photography, where you're in this place where you're like, oh my gosh, we got a 2-hour drive home. The kids are hungry. We got to leave. The light's terrible. I'd love to be back here someday at sunset. This is a west-facing coast. It would just be an amazing place to explore at sunset. And again, I'm throwing in a couple of images here from the 50 to 250. This is a king parrot. And this is obviously a koala that was in the wild. Literally, Pike saw him. We were driving in the car, and there's a koala in the trees. And, having that little, this is uncropped, that little Z50, there's just nothing wrong with APS-C, particularly for wildlife and sports and action. I mean, that cropped sensor is amazing, much like many of us use the D500 to increase the reach on our lens. I know David, when he's out shooting wildlife with his 400 TC, is frequently flipping that 1.4 teleconverter and then hitting DX mode to just get a little bit more reach with the Z9. The little Z50 was like having a wonderful little camera for my son, and at the same time having that reach I wanted for wildlife if it happened. And then, of course, everybody knows I love that Voigtlander 51.0 just for its ability to render these kinds of dreamy images, and this is with a case 82 millimeter circular polarizer and a 3-stop neutral density combined, and it just has a way. And then the monochrome mode in the ZF, I really haven't touched this image. It's just pretty much straight out of the camera, and I love the ability to use that focus assist while manually focusing a lens like that and see the green square when the eye is in focus. I put the spot on little baby Stella there, and when her little eyelashes got a green square shot, It's pretty darn nuts. We went
Does
and
one question about that, looking at that picture of Pike, does it have a little bit of vignetting there? I mean, is that?
oh,
where you're-
that 50 wide open at 1.0 has a significant amount of vignetting,
Yeah,
but it's a vignetting that I kind of love. I mean, that really shows up in this image, right?
yeah, yep,
And it's not because of the filter, because I'm using an 82 millimeter filter in front of a 62 millimeter filter threaded 50. It's the lens itself. And I love
yeah,
the way that it vignettes. Um, could be challenging maybe in some cropping situations, but you know, I'm usually not using the lens when I'm in a way like that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I don't mind the vignetting in that lens. And it goes away quickly. You stop down to f2.8, it's nowhere near as significant.
yeah.
But at 1.0, it definitely vignettes. And then this is just showing, you know, how versatile the little 24 to 120 is. We went to this guy who was kind of like a modern version of the crocodile hunter. He does all kinds of educational stuff, and he has this incredible ranch filled with all these exotic reptiles and lizards and, you know, all kinds of animals. And we my cousin is friends with him, so he just invited us to come. He normally does big corporate events and schools and things like that, but we went to go to his actual place, Wildlife Exposures, and got to play with some of his friends, and it was just wonderful. And that 24 to 120 was the perfect sort of lens. I could zoom in when I want to, pull back when I don't want to. And then, you know, not to think that Australia doesn't have some cities too. Melbourne was an awesome city, and you know, when I stalk around the city, the Leica Q cameras are just the perfect thing for it. A little quick aside story that this is just hysterical. Their version of Macy's has their Christmas bluey window displays, and we were like, oh, we'll go. It's a big thing in Melbourne. And then when we got there, we realized they had rope chains up, and people for 2 blocks were going 3 deep along these chained routes to be able to get in to see the windows. It looked like it was like an hour wait to see the windows. But outside on the street side were these park benches. So we just climbed up in the park benches and held the kids up to see over the crowd in the windows and went off to get dumplings. We were like, Bluey's great, but not necessarily that great. So, you know,
So,
fun times with the family, things you
so
can do with different lenses and cameras.
Chris Taylor had a question regarding the HDR that you did. And this comes up from time to time in workshops. Is there a reason not to expand further in exposure, like 5 stops under on the meter and 5 stops over? Or go
Well,
4, 5?
or go, I mean, I think most cameras you can do 3 stops is kind of the stretch, the widest you can do exposure between frames bracketing automatically. But you can go 5 frames deep if you want. You can go 6 stops under, 3 stops under on the meter, 3 stops over, 6 stops over. Usually that's more than you need working with cameras with 14, you know, plus stops of dynamic range. There are times, you know, when we shoot the eclipse without filters, when it's in totality in Mazatlan, I'll have everybody set up to do 5 image bursts 3 stops apart, and that'll be more than adequate, you know. But the key, and I think Rick will 100% agree with me here, the key is really to look at your histogram, because it's going to tell the tale for you. You know, you fire off your burst, and then you hit play and you go to the tricolor histogram, and at the overexposed image, you should have a nice set of shadows on the left side of your histogram, but they don't go all the way off. And in your underexposed frame, you should have a nice set of highlights, like that bell curve ramping down, that don't go all the way off the frame. Now, if the sun is in your frame, you're shooting sunset and it's backlit and the sun is actually in your frame, or you've got a sun star, probably the red channel is going to have a little spike off to the right. You're not going to see the sunspots and detail on the sun. It's going to be a specular highlight. If you're shooting a nightscape and there are city streetlights, there's going to be little bits of pure white, or certainly some of your color channels have gone off the edge a little bit. And that's fine, but you don't want green and blue to be all the way off at the same time. That's why you look at the tricolor histogram. You want to see all 3 color channels.
Yeah. I mean,
So
they,
you've got an indicator. That histogram tells you whether your 3 frames, 3 stops apart worked or not. The middle one should have it going off both the left and right side of the histogram. You've lost shadows, you've lost highlights. That's why you're bracketing. The overexposed one should have nice shadows. The underexposed one should have nice highlights. You know, if you're still going off both sides, well, then think about moving to 5 frames. But I just never need it.
yeah, I don't feel, I mean, we've been getting by with 2.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing that I would add is there are times when I'm looking at the histogram for the 3 shots and I'll go, well, I need to actually drag this down a bit, you know, I'll do some exposure compensation to the left or the right, you know,
Yep.
to sort of capture that scene the way that I want it. But, you know,
Yeah, perhaps you start 2 stops under the meter and you shoot 5 stops underexposed, 2 stops underexposed, 1 stop overexposed, and it gives you everything you need.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, but looking at the histogram is really the key to so much of this stuff, you know.
And
Yeah.
that histogram is what's going to tell you whether to do what Rick just recommended and shift the whole sequence left or right, you know, over or under a little bit.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, cool. And you got a cool Christmas present or a birthday present.
Well, birthday present, yeah.
Birthday present, right.
Yeah, a big 6'5". But my daughter came to visit me, and those of you who I know through workshops or other ways know that I love photo books. That's one of the things that I use as a tool to just sort of help hone my photography. You know, what are the types of images that I like, and what are the types of images that I don't like? And my daughter, who is also a photographer, she lives in Portland, and she went to Powell's, and she brought me a bunch of art books for my birthday. And they're all awesome. But she introduced me to a photographer I'd never heard of, and I can't believe I haven't heard of her. Her name is Christina Mittermeier. She's known as Mitty, is kind of the way that people talk about her. I'll put in the chat information about her. But anyway, she gave me this book called Amaze, and it's huge. I mean, it's a big book. I saw it, looked at it this morning. It's like $50 on Amazon. But I was looking through the book, and she reminds me a lot of one of Hudson's favorite photographers, Sebastião Salgado.
Mm-hmm.
She's Mexican. She was trained as a marine biologist. She's a photographer. She's a Sony photographer. Woohoo!
I saw Tony put his hand up.
Right, Tony?
Yeah.
And DC.
Yep, and DC.
But she does landscape. She does unbelievable portraiture. I mean, I just like some of the stuff that she's done.
It's very Salgado.
She's very much into indigenous peoples. There's photographs of indigenous peoples in British Columbia, on the coast of Victoria Island, Brazilian. But she's also, I mean, she's really into, you know, as I said, she's a phenomenal landscape photographer. She's an amazing writer, and she's just, her photography is just like stunned me. I'm really kind of blown away.
Some of the
by
underwater work
the
you showed
depth.
me
Yeah, I'm
was
looking for that one sort of underwater photograph that you know, I mean, this one is just nuts. I don't know how well, I mean, you know, it's look at but if you look at her website, she's got some great photography up there. This book is called Amaze, and there's links to it in the chat. But I'm amazed that I have never heard of this woman, but she's just she writes a little bit. The book's set in 4 sections, and she writes a little bit about, you know, what, you know, some of the indigenous people she's working with, some of the ocean conservation stuff she does, and it was just phenomenal. So I would check out her work, you know, on the website. Christina Mittermeier is her name. So that was kind of that was actually my favorite thing from the holidays. And then I'll just say one more thing. So to jumpstart, I actually got one of my New Year's resolutions done already. Hudson knows, I mean, we print, right? Hudson and I love to print. And for years, I used to, at the end of every year, and the beginning of every year, I would create a set of prints, usually 2 or 3 prints that I had done that I felt was indicative of the work that I was proud of that year. And I would send them off to friends, old friends, mostly people who I hadn't talked to in a while, I haven't seen. And so this year, I was like, you better do this. So last week, I spent the time, and I just did, the little half letter size prints, of stuff I did, the Palouse Spring. And I just do a little note to people, just sort of saying, hey, how you doing? Got these really cool little glassine bags that I put them in, and I just sent them off. And last week I sent off 35 of those to friends. So one New Year's resolution done. So
There you go.
how about you? What do you have for resolutions this year?
I think I'm going to do a little bit more personal shooting this year. And I've seen some other people say that in resolutions too. I saw Jason Ward send in a resolution on the edge of this thing starting up, and Woody posted it in our chat. And he said that he's been doing so much for work that he hasn't done enough of his own personal sort of landscape photography. And I want to do a little bit more of that myself. And I'd like to, me, I'm always sort of combining the creative with the sort of scientific analysis. I got that left brain, right brain balance thing happening. And I want to play around a little bit more with pixel shift shooting in the right conditions, as opposed to panoramic shooting, and then do some printing and comparisons. Because at my core, photography for me was, initially about going on adventures and telling stories, and the workshops are just these adventures and stories and shared learning experience, capturing those stories and being able to bring them back and tell them. And then as I got more and more into it, this perfection of getting really big printable images became a bit of an obsession for me, and doing panoramas in the days when we had smaller megapixel cameras. And I've maybe not done as much of that since I'm shooting with 46 and 60 megapixels. But I love this little 24 megapixel camera that I've got, and it has the ability to do these 96, megapixel resolution files, which I've been more and more impressed with. In fact, this week's ATS will be about doing pixel shift shooting. And I think it's something that's going to be coming in future Nikon cameras. Sony's already got it. A lot of cameras already have it, and it's not like Nikon's the new player or the new innovator here. Yeah. They're picking up things other people have been doing, but they've done a pretty good job of it. And so I want to play around with some of those technologies and do a little bit more personal shooting and storytelling on my own. That's not necessarily all about the workshops. So that's a resolution for me. And just really quick on that note, there was a question that just came in that Darren pumped in from YouTube asking, because I talked about the Z50 and lower resolution, and whether or not a Z50 image, say that shot I got of the koala bear in the tree, would work for a 2-page magazine spread. And I'll just say that I had 2-page magazine spreads, in Islands Magazine and Sierra Magazine and other magazines back in the day when I was doing more commercial stuff, from my 12 megapixel D700, let alone the 20 megapixel Z50. And so of course, absolutely. Yes. In fact, I have 12 megapixel images up in my house that I love that are printed 24 by 36. So they have a viewing distance. But
right. Yeah, that's the viewing distance. And the other thing is that it's really important to start with a well-exposed image.
Sharp, well-exposed image.
Yeah. Yes. The issue that I run into a lot with people when they talk, especially when they talk about printing and printing big, is they'll say, hey, Rick, I'm not getting a great print out of this. And it's like, you go back and you look at the original image and it wasn't sharp, or it's been over processed, and all of those things show up even more the bigger you print.
Or it started really underexposed, like we showed with that image from Australia with the sunbreak.
Yeah.
You know, when you start trying to pull the shadows too far, they break down. Can look good small, particularly on a screen, but once you zoom in like a print does, all of a sudden all those
Yeah.
little flaws stand out. You know.
Yeah.
So,
And remember
what are
too,
your
we get
oh, go
so into pixel peeping
Mhm.
that, it's like we print big and we go take the print and put it up to our nose, and it's, a large format print is designed to be viewed from feet away,
Yes.
not
A
inches.
billboard looks like dots if you're standing on its ledge.
Yeah. So
The old joke is that a photographer's only viewing distance is the length of their nose from their eyes. So what are your other resolutions, Rick?
well, my big one for this year is I'm about 2/3 of the way through selecting my current portfolio. And I've been working on this now for 2.5 years. And I'm getting to the point where I'm literally down to about 35 images that I got to cull down to 20. That's my portfolio. And I've got a good chunk of them chosen. I'm still working on those final ones. And then the ultimate goal is to print and matte all of those 20 images at 16 by 20. And so that's my goal. I think I will get it done this year. I'd hoped to get it done last year, but some workshop dude like kept me a little too busy, I come back and I'd be depleted. So
it's interesting. I think that I just saw Al ask if we'll be able to see it, and I one of the resolutions for the business, I think for this endeavor is to get some more images back up on the website. We used to have galleries, and then we sort of split that off, and I think we should have a little more representative imagery. So I think the answer is going to be yes, and one of my resolutions is to work down a representative portfolio as well. And David Archer, your ears should be tingling a little bit because you should throw some things on there too, and we'll put some representative images from the people leading workshops. So
yeah, I mean, for me, the end result of my portfolio is, why do I do a portfolio? It's, I get someone I don't know or some family or friends, and they're like, hey, can I see your work? And it's like, I don't want to show them 60 images. I don't want to show them the same, from a set here or there. I just want to show them that these are the things that I consider to be representative of me. And I will make those available. I probably put them on my website. I will probably put them on our website, and I'll have them on my, I carry my iPad around with me everywhere, and I use Lightroom, and I put, I'll put the portfolio on there. So for sure.
nice.
Yeah. So
cool.
David, you got any resolutions other than kicking our ass more as a photographer?
I don't do resolutions per se, like on the first of the year, but I'm always kind of working towards things. But what I've been doing lately is just making myself get up and out and go out shooting. And so I've been successful doing it, 4 or 5 days a week here, mostly birds and things this time of year. But
it's interesting you say that. There are a number of people who commented about what they were going to do for resolutions or to improve their photography this year. And a lot of it is, especially for folks in the winter, Ken Parent was talking about this, that, it's like forcing yourself to get out there with the camera and shoot, get out there and actually do the work. You might not come away with stuff that you're wild about, but you will sort of practice your skills. We're going. We're going to be where? We're going to be in Costa Rica this year. We're going to be in Charleston. We're going to be in Glacier. I've got to get better at wildlife photography. So, it's like for me, the Charleston workshop is going to be, I've got a new lens. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to practice so that when we go to Costa Rica, I'm not fumbling around with my kit to try and get those images. And
that's a big part of it, is familiarity with your tools.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, I always draw the parallel about playing a musical instrument. You've got to get the technical things kind of with second nature, and you don't have to think about them. You think about getting into the flow and being more creative.
Yeah.
So that's part. And it's also good for fitness too. You know, if I'm out schlepping a 10-pound camera and lens, walking around. I'm actually when I'm sometimes on the back paths, I'll be doing some curls like that with that camera and lens as I'm walking along, just because that's another little something I can
Yeah.
add.
Well, you
Some
are an
people
old
use-
man after all, and you do need to, you know, keep working.
Some people use kettlebells. David Archer uses a Z9 with a 400 TC.
Hey, pumping glass is great exercise.
Darren, you got any resolutions other than take that Christmas tree down?
Yeah, you're good. You're good for anything there, Rick. I haven't really thought about it, but definitely some of that resonates pretty hard. Getting out and doing photography, doing it for myself. I bring the median age down here a little bit. I turned 40 this year, and so to get out and
Young punk.
do stuff for me, right? Whether that's get out and take photos, just kind of take an adventure, get out and meet folks and do things photographically. That's great, and that's in addition to maybe not taking 17,000 soccer photos this year, maybe not taking 1,700 photos at a hockey game, and about 2,500 at an IndyCar race weekend, right? To be more particular, right, with kind of what I'm doing and when. So I'm not spending 8 hours trying to cull through things. But I think in a nutshell, it's a little bit of being selfish and a little bit of kind of getting out there and doing stuff that's kind of front of mind for me right now.
Cool. Uh-oh, are we? You there,
Let me
Rick?
see. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you just froze for a second for me. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually looking. We had a bunch of people who, their resolutions were, what they wanted to do this year was sort of get better at post-processing. Getting better at Photoshop, getting better at, trying to understand Photoshop better as well as, Lightroom. Photoshop, I think, has gotten more important to all of us as a tool in the last year and a half with the sort of generative fill. Some of the things that aren't present in Lightroom Classic or Lightroom CC. I'll say, Hudson was talking earlier about, being in Australia and you're just there shooting as, you're there with your family. And one of the best ways, I talk about this in the printing workshop, that one of the best ways to improve your editing skills as a photographer is to edit a lot and, to stop treating snapshots as throwaways. These are things that I just do when I'm off with the family. As you develop your editing skills for your landscape stuff, you're going to improve all of your editing, right? I'm sorry, if you spend time editing your snapshots, okay, it's going to help inform how you are as a photographer, and it's also going to improve your editing skills post-processing wise. I mean, that's something that I've found really essential over the years. And for me, it's all about editing quickly,
And I think that, something for people to think about as a just a suggested resolution is, we've done a lot of videos over these recent years about culling through your images after a shoot, doing it in a quick and efficient way. Really hone that down to where you can cull through, and before you touch a slider on an image, you've really identified those that are important to you from the whole, not just picking the first one that's interesting and spending hours on it, but run through as quickly as you can after you shoot those images and identify the ones that you want to look at and really cull it down to the very best and work through and edit those as soon after the shoot as you can, because you're going to have it fresh in your mind what you were doing with your camera in the field when it happened. And there's things that you learn that you wish you'd done differently while you're editing, and that might inform the next time you're out shooting. And pretty soon, if you can keep that really concurrent, which is the thing that the workshops have driven me to do over the past decade, I more and more try to edit to be able to show things from yesterday, even if it makes me stay up a little bit late. And I find that what I did the day before informs the next day. Oh, I wish I'd done this differently. I wish I'd added a little exposure compensation. I wish I'd shot it at a slightly different angle. It's like you're just on a faster learning pace if you're incorporating that editing and the shooting. You wind up shooting for the edit and editing for the shoot. And it's really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. I've mentioned this in the past, especially around this time of year. One of the projects that I do every year is I go back 10 or 12 years and I take a year in Lightroom and I just go through and look at all of the photos that I took that year. And it's really instructive. Like this year I went through 2013, which was a pretty crazy year for me. And I had like 5,000 photos that I started with. And it's amazing how you can look back at your old work and go, ugh. But you can also recognize, at least I do, I recognize that there are themes in my work that were present even back then. And maybe some images were not as successful as they might be now where I'm shooting them. But it's really instructive to me. And it also helps me because I end up throwing a lot of stuff out. You know, it's amazing to me how crappy I was at focus. I got better by 2013, but it's like I look at some of my stuff from 2007 or 2008 and it's like, whoa, what were you thinking?
Brutal, I know.
You know, the way that I do it is just taking a year at a time and not trying to get it all done at once. I take a few months to sort of work through it. You know, it's really instructive, and I almost inevitably find a photograph or two that I'm like, wow, I didn't even recognize that that was a good photograph at the time. You know, a lot of the ones, and some of them I go back and I re-edit because I can, right? I was shooting raw back then, you know, and I think it's a great exercise to do, even if you just do like a little bit at a time. You know, I find it's not negative to me. It's actually very positive.
So speaking about, you know, going back through your archive and knowing where all those images are, should we talk really briefly about the Lightroom Classic versus Lightroom CC and organizing for a second?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of, well, our good friend Matt Kloskowski set off a bit of a firestorm that sort of worked through some of our old workshop WhatsApp groups. Some are more active than others. But I've seen it throughout where, you know, Matt basically said, I'm done with Lightroom Classic. I'm going to be using Lightroom CC. Get over it. And then a couple of other people were talking about it. And, you know, and people were asking us, you know, what do we think? I mean, you know, one of the things that Adobe added in Lightroom CC was the ability, you know, Lightroom CC, when it started, you had to put all of your photos in the cloud, in their cloud. You had no recourse otherwise.
Use that version of Lightroom. Yeah.
Right. You could have photos that were stored locally, but all the originals were in the cloud, you know, and the idea was if you have multiple machines, you had a phone, you had an iPad, that, you know, you'd have your work everywhere. And Lightroom Classic lets you sort of do some of that, but, you know, it's, you know, what we've appreciated with Lightroom Classic is the fact that I get my library where I want my library. You know, I'm not paying for Adobe storage, given how much, you know, I've 20 terabytes of photo data, you know, that if I were to do that in Adobe's cloud, that would be hundreds of dollars a month in storage. And I also, you know, how do I back that up? Because, you know, what happens if something happens? So that's been for me the biggest stumbling block with Lightroom CC. And even with this new local tab that they have, they're still designed to be two separate entities. You know, there's like your
Mhm.
cloud stuff, and then there's the stuff you have stored locally. There, I'm sure someday Adobe is going to integrate it.
Yeah.
But you know, that for me sort of removes that as a tool that I'm going to use. That and the fact that I can't print from Lightroom, and I've gotten to the point where I'm not using Photoshop for printing anymore.
I
You know,
love printing out Lightroom
um,
Classic.
you know, and I'm not quite sure why Adobe hasn't included that. But I think for us, you know, the Lightroom mobile, the Lightroom on the iPad and on the phone is phenomenal, and I use it all the time. I share collections to the cloud. You know, and there's some
It
limitations.
works
I wish
fine
that
in
I could.
Classic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I wish that I could share smart collections to the cloud. You can't do that. But you know, for the most part, it works well for me. You know, and we're still getting plenty of questions in the workshops from people about, you know, how to best organize their photos. And maybe you can talk a little bit to that. But you know, for me, I don't see Lightroom CC being my tool of choice on my desktop anytime soon.
No, no. Well, and I just saw James out. I mean, Rick and I both like to print out of Lightroom. It's got just a wonderful interface for printing. But I I'm 100% with Rick on this, and I do envision eventually Adobe is going to integrate things. At least I hope, because it's sort of strange having these two pipelines.
Yeah.
And I know, you know, that I'm sure a lot of the people who are really pushing Lightroom CC probably have unlimited cloud storage,
Yeah.
you know, as part of their influencer status. It's just, I have way too many photos, and organizing them is a thing that Lightroom is better at than anything else that I know of. You have to understand the database nature of it and how to harness its power, but it's very, very powerful for keeping track of where your images and collections of images from different sources are, and, you know, virtual copies of the same image edited different ways. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to be able to interface with a large photo storage collection, and as your image collection grows, for it to grow with you. And Rick and I have been for a long time in the process of outlining and designing this course on organizing in Lightroom Classic, and we are putting the rubber to the road early this year on that, so you'll see it coming.
I think Adobe wants to, I mean, Al said, you know, it's like Adobe's going to go through a transition to get to one Lightroom tool. And I think you're probably right about that. You know, using Lightroom CC as an editor there's not a lot of difference between Classic and CC. You know, it's some of the stuff around it, and it's the fact that, I mean, Lightroom, LRCC has one phenomenal tool that Classic doesn't have, which is the sort of search engine, you know, so
AI
because all of your
search.
stuff's in the cloud, you know, it uses, you know, their AI stuff to sort of categorize your images in a way that, you know, Lightroom Classic can't on your computer.
Look for blue cup, you know.
Right, you know, and it's phenomenal at that. I mean, it's really phenomenal at that. But I will tell you that as someone who tried it for a couple of years, running both simultaneously is not a good idea. It really is not. You know, you know, on your computer, on your desktop. You know, so you know, I think Adobe wishes that Lightroom Classic would go away, but there are plenty of people sort of in our boat. You know, I mean, would I use it if they gave me 20 terabytes of storage and it was still $99.99 a month? I probably would think about it. It still doesn't solve my printing workflow, but
Yeah,
you
they
know,
need to put printing and soft proofing in it. That's for
you know,
sure.
and I want a way to back up my photos to my systems and to my cloud. You know, I use Backblaze, and it's a lot less expensive to store all of my photos in Backblaze. So
yeah. What is Backblaze up to a month now for unlimited?
I don't remember. It still was under $100 a year. So
yeah, it's under
or maybe it's 150. Even if it was 150, it's still worth it.
Yeah, it's not
so.
very expensive, and there's no upper limit on what you can back up. And it's interesting, we had somebody ask kind of off topic of editing and resolutions about, because I did some videos recently and did another video about Synology and network attached storage. Someone asked, should I use RAID 5 or RAID 6 for my network attached storage? And that's just whether or not there's enough redundancy in your group of drives. It looks like one big drive to have 2 hard drive failures or 1 hard drive failure. And I personally use Synology's version of RAID 5, which only gives you the redundancy of 1 hard drive failure. And I don't worry about it at all because I have an uninterrupted power supply connected to that NAS, so that with a USB port that tells the NAS if the power goes out, the NAS knows, and if the battery in that UPS runs low, it'll automatically spin its hard drives down and shut down. So there's unlikely to be any damage or data loss in any of those hard drives in a power failure. And I mean, what are the odds that 2 drives fail at the same time? And even if they did, the way that I work and the way I would recommend everyone work is I have 2 copies of everything here in the studio. There's a set of just big, slow, cheap spinning hard drives that back up the NAS. I just have them connected, and they're, different portions of the NAS go to a different hard drive. Video goes to one, photos from 1993 to 2016 go to another, more modern photos go to another of these big 16 terabyte drives. And those are connected to my computer and connected to Backblaze. There's an incremental backup program running that just synchronizes what's on the NAS right to those big drives that are connected directly to my desktop, and those get backed up to the cloud via Backblaze for super cheap. Backblaze won't back up network attached storage for super cheap. They consider you enterprise level for that, and they'll charge you through the teeth per terabyte. But for just being a connected slow spinning drive, is that way I've got a backup copy here in the studio. If anything ever went wrong with that, I wouldn't really need to go to Backblaze. The only real reason I know to need to go to Backblaze is if there's a fire or a flood or some horrible catastrophic thing that takes my whole studio out and I need to rebuild my data from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, Backblaze, getting files from Backblaze is very difficult. What you want to do is they offer a program where basically you can get a hard drive sent to you, you pay a deposit for it, you get all of your data, then you send the drive back and you get the deposit back.
It's catastrophic insurance.
Yeah. And that, Gary said, you don't want to have a backup offsite just in case. And it's like, I used to do that. When I was living in the Portland area, I used to bring my drive from home and store it in your studio. But now it's like I'm in the same boat as you. I've got the NAS, I've got a RAID that's connected to my computer that's sort of backed up and backs up to Backblaze, and I've got my original drives. I'm not worried about that. Backblaze will, and if something happens and Backblaze is gone, I think I'm gonna have a lot bigger things to worry about then.
But to the original question, whether you use SR5 or RAID 5 or RAID 6, I mean, I think that 5 makes more sense in a scenario where you're locally backed up that way, because you don't lose the storage capacity of 2 of your drives. You only lose the storage capacity of 1. I mean, there's always the possibility that one of those hard drives goes bad, and it's nice to have at least 1 hard drive redundancy. But if you go with RAID 6, you lose the capacity of 2. So in my case, having 6 10 terabyte hard drives, I wind up with 50 terabytes. I would only wind up with 40 terabytes if I use RAID 6.
I would add that I have 2 10 terabyte hard drives in a box that haven't been used yet, that are sitting there just in case that something might happen. I don't know, you need to, but it's like, it's easy enough to sort of have. Those, they're actually fairly cheap. Oh, right. Darren, cold spares for the win. Yep. Woohoo!
Do we have any other resolutions to chat about?
I don't think so. Actually, let me see. Most people were talking about things like, they want to sort of figure out ways to sort of get out more. And there are a lot of people who are like, I'm not going to buy more gear. I'm going to learn how to use the ones that I have. You know, a bunch of people talking about primes. I think our discussion about primes sort of got people talking about primes themselves.
It's just blown me away. I mean, if you were to look at one of the major changes in my life as a photographer over the past, let's say 8 years, it's a shift from favoring zooms to favoring primes. I love my prime lenses. You know, now the zoom is I'm heading to Baja for a good friend's 60th birthday party next week and to do a little kite surfing. I'm in a real short hop trip. It's a birthday or a Christmas present from my wife. She sort of surprised me with it. And all I'm going to take is the Z9 and the 100 to 400 and the 24 to 120 because I want to be able to do some kite surfing shots and some birds in flight shots and just have a general purpose lens. And that's the thing zooms are great for. But you know, the quality that you get out of a prime just always seems to supersede the zoom to my mind. You know, the more I work with them, the more I love them.
You know, the big change for me that I agree. I've always loved primes. But the big change for me is how radically the world has shifted with the Z and the Sony systems that we're using, from the old holy trinity of 2.8s,
Yeah.
you know, to now it's like, you know, there's 24-105, 24-120, 100 to 400, and let's use some primes to sort of work around it.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing to me. You know,
That's a really good point. I mean, you don't need to be hauling hundreds of pounds of 2.8 glass when we've got the kind of high ISO performance that we get out of our modern sensors. You're 100% right. Yeah. And the quality that we have in these f4, f5.6 lenses is just shocking. So I agree.
yeah, Darren says, you know, I mean, there's uses for them. I mean, there
Oh,
are
yeah.
uses for these lenses,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, you're talking about the Plena, right? The Plena was an amazing lens. Would I love to have that, you know, on type of lens like that on Sony? And yeah, it'd be great to have, but you know, I still have the Sony or the Canon 135 f2, and it's like I barely use it, you know. You know, I'm using my 16 to 35 2.8 less than I was before as well. The 21.8 prime and the 24-105 are a great pair of lenses to have.
Yep.
And I'm realizing that as much as I love sometimes 16, 20 is just right, you know.
And you can always shoot a pano.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I did in Scotland. You know, I did that sort of vertical pano at East Point, which is two shots. It was like boom, boom. You
Yep.
know,
Gives you like 14.
yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we have kind of again wasted everybody's good Tuesday morning. And so thanks to everybody for joining in. February 20th. So we'll talk a little bit about the printing workshops. If you get printing questions, throw those in.
Yes. Printing
And then
questions.
we'll also be interested to hear your thoughts about, and please narrowly, the idea of AI technologies and using it to help your photography, basically from an editing standpoint. You know, what do you think about it? You know, is there a line that gets crossed? You know, does something become a composite that's something very different than what you were out there trying to shoot? Are you trying for that type of stuff? It should be interesting to hear from people what they're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those tools that we have where people are going to have some line that they draw, and different
Yeah.
people's lines may be different. And
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit because this came up quite a bit in the last workshops we did. Sorry, in 2024, where you know all of this generative fill stuff was I mean, you know, it's like every 2 weeks Adobe was coming out with a new version of Photoshop that had improvements to it. And we had lots of discussions about it during the workshops, and I thought it was instructive, you know.
Yeah.
So
Very
we'll talk
much.
about that. So
Cool.
all right.
All right.
Well,
Thanks,
everybody,
Rick. Thanks, Woody. Thanks, David. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I hope everybody's enjoying the new year.
Yep. Guys, take care.
Take care,
We'll see
everybody.
some of you soon.